Hello, normal people. It's been another news-packed week in Canadian politics. Parliament is still suspended. And there's been a lot of news on the Liberal leadership front, the threat of American tariffs, and some new developments on what the government is now calling illegal immigration. But there's a lot more too. And I'm joined today to unpack all of this with veteran conservative political strategist, Sean Schnell. Sean,
Good to
where
see
should
you.
we start? Where should we start this week?
Well, it has been a busy week, and there's been a lot going on with the Liberal leadership, and we've passed that first milestone where we now know who exactly the contenders are going to be. So we know that there's 7 individuals. They had to
7. So just so listeners know, the milestone you're talking about is the deadline to submit essentially what's amounts to an application package, right? Like what they would call it, as well as a $50,000 deposit, right?
Right.
And so how many people made it and who is in or that we know of?
So reportedly, it was 7 people that have met the deadline, and we have Mark Carney, Christia Freeland, and then 2 other current sitting Liberal members of Parliament, Arya and Batiste, and then 2 former Liberal members of Parliament, Baylis and Dalla. But really, the conversation is focusing around the 2 frontrunners, Mark Carney and Christia Freeland, whom one of them you were very busy with this week over the last few days here.
I was very busy. Do you want me to unpack what happened there?
Why don't you let everybody who maybe didn't see what you were up to know what you were doing?
Okay, so I agree. We should focus our conversation on the 2 front runners, Mark Carney and Christia Freeland. So Mark Carney announced his campaign, I guess almost 2 weeks ago now. He soft launched it on an American TV show, American comedy TV show, and then he did a fairly splashy launch in Edmonton where there were actually accredited members of the Alberta Legislative Press Gallery that were removed. I think the Association of Canadian Journalists actually had to weigh in on this issue. So it wasn't like this big open event, but it was a splashy one. But then since that point, crickets from him, nothing, like not a peep, not a single media availability. And so yesterday we got wind early in the morning that Mark Carney was in Ottawa. I'm in Ottawa right now, heading back to Calgary very shortly. We got wind he was in Ottawa for the Liberal caucus meeting, which was odd because he's not a member of the Liberal caucus. He's actually unelected. So we just kind of assumed he was doing this to make himself available to the media. But it turned out that he was holding a cocktail reception. So we were calling it the Canapé Carney Cocktail Carbon Tax Hour. I digress.
Yeah.
So anyway, I held a press availability. I went out to the media later in the afternoon and I asked, I said, well, where is Mark Carney? Why hasn't he taken questions from the media? And I'm going to pause and just say the whole reason why this is important, Sean, is that I have to reemphasize that this man is not an elected member of Parliament.
Right.
And there's a very good chance he will be the Prime Minister of Canada in about 6 weeks' time. And we know nothing about what his plans for the country are. We know what his track record is he's, one of the global architects of the carbon tax, many other very damaging policies. He's been Justin Trudeau's unelected senior economic advisor for a long period of time. We haven't seen that report that he was supposed to put forward. There's a lot of questions about his ethics, but we don't know where he stands on virtually any issue. So anyway, I asked, I did this little press release, and then so he was heading to his cocktail party with Liberal members of Parliament and cabinet ministers. And the press caught up with him. They caught him going into this event. And I want to tell you why I think him and his campaign team are hiding him. But I know you're interested in going through a couple of the clips that came out of this press scrum with Carney.
Yeah, well, let's play the first clip here.
What would you say to someone who says being prime minister is not an entry-level job in English and French?
I've had many jobs. I've had many jobs where I came in at the top. I came in at the top of the Bank of England, Bank of Canada, in terms of the United Nations and climate change. But again,
oh man. Okay, so for those who aren't watching on video, just to describe the scene, you've got a gaggle of Ottawa press gallery reporters who Carney has literally been hiding from, right? Like he's been hiding from these people for a week now. And one of them asked him, as they caught up with him walking into this cocktail party, what do you say to somebody who says that being prime minister isn't an entry-level job? And you can hear in the background this like sort of rich chuckle that said, it's essentially translated to, why would I talk to you peasants, right? And then he kind of laughs it off and he goes, well, I start at the top. And then he goes on to list roles that he was appointed into, which he arguably, had some pretty serious failures in. And it was just that lack of humility and arrogance and entitlement to the job, right? And I want to unpack this, but I just think it's such a misread of where the Canadian public is. So many people are looking for somebody who understands their need, and here you've got this Grey Poupon flavored, well, I start at the top, peasant comment. I know it hit you the same way. What did you think?
Yeah, well, and I don't even think it's a misread of the Canadian public, because they weren't even a consideration. He didn't even talk about them. And so like we've got two clips here, and we'll get to the other one later, but this was a very short scrum, very short conversation with the media. It was just a couple of minutes long in total. But even in that period of time, you've got this guy who in a period of weeks could be the next prime minister of Canada and leader of the Liberal Party, reading off some sort of elitist resume without any conversation about the challenges that people are actually facing in this country, and thinking that is going to be good enough to put to bed any of the questions from the media and the critics about why he's seeking this particular position. And the strategy here is bizarre, to be perfectly honest, even just from a political strategy, because even if Mark Carney is successful in becoming the next leader of the Liberal Party and in turn the next prime minister, you're not going to be able to keep him hidden from Canadians. At some point, the House of Commons is going to return. At some point, we are going to go to an election. It should be now, but at some point we're going. And this guy is going to have to face the actual questions and some actual criticism. And people ought to be given the opportunity to see exactly who this guy is and what he stands for now, before he's given the reins of power here. And so I absolutely agree with you. I think it's elitist. I think it's out of touch. I think it was totally tone deaf. And I think that it is setting off alarm bells for people that are seeing these little glimpses of it, that are going to work, that are having trouble paying bills, making ends meet here. And this is who the Liberals are putting out. This is who the establishment is rallying behind to try and solve their problems. The guy that orchestrated all of these policies to begin with, it's a wild move on their part to try and keep him hidden without answering these questions. And I think good on you I think you forced him out of hiding with this.
I think we did.
This press conference.
Well, I want to be clear though. like, it's not like he didn't hold a media availability here.
Yeah.
The Parliamentary Press Gallery Corps caught up with him knowing that he was going into this cocktail party. So he wasn't like, he was walking into this event. It was sort of a drive-by where they were trying to throw questions at him.
Yeah.
And I think it's more telling that this morning he had a media availability scheduled late yesterday, and then they canceled it this morning. And I think that they canceled it. He is not good answering policy questions or anything. That entitled tone does come out, but he's also not ready for prime time with the best of the best. The Globe and Mail's Bob Fife. Robert Fife is one of Canada's top investigative journalists. As much as we often and rightly criticize the mainstream media for bias, Bob Fife is one of these investigative journalists that will go after anyone, and he's extremely clever and really can cut to the heart of an issue. So just as Mark Carney was going into this very posh cocktail reception in Ottawa that he was hosting, Bob Fife was able to get a question in, and it was just devastating. And I think you have the clip.
Yeah, let's listen.
Just hang on. Hang on a second. Let me ask you a question. Can I ask you a question? You say you're the outsider, but it looks like the party establishment is lined up behind you.
No. Say the question. It's the issue of deputies, elected members, ministers, others, liberals across the country who are making a choice
Oh man. Fife the knife strikes again. Well done. So what Bob Fife asked there was getting at the heart of one of the big criticisms of the week against Mark Carney, which was he's claimed that he's this outsider candidate. And for those of you who are watching this on Substack and get my Substack newsletters, I wrote an op-ed about why Mark Carney can't make a outsider claim. I think the title of my piece was Mark Carney is not an outsider. He's the president of the club.
Yeah.
But Fife was trying to get at the fact that literally every part of the Trudeau establishment is backing Mark Carney. He is the continuity candidate. So, I mean, just before we started recording this, I'm not sure if you saw, Sean, Seamus O'Regan, one of Trudeau's groomsmen, endorsed him. Brian Lilley in the Toronto Sun last week talked about, he reported that Katie Telford, Justin Trudeau's chief of staff, closest inner circle person, was making calls on behalf of Mark Carney. Tom Pitfield, who is the Liberals' key pollster, he had to recuse himself because he was helping out Carney, reportedly. He's married to Anna Gainey, who's a member of Parliament, which is in Trudeau's inner circle. I think Anna Gainey, if I remember correctly, she went with Trudeau to the Aga Khan Island, big scandal back in the day. And now she's hosting a fundraiser for him. Gerald Butts, Trudeau's former senior advisor, is helping, or if not running, Carney's campaign. So this is the establishment campaign. This is the plan B to Trudeau for all of these people to continue the agenda that has essentially bankrupted Canada. But I want to get into the mechanics of why they're running this terrible campaign with Mark Carney and why they're hiding him from the media. Now, you've run a lot of conservative campaigns. You've seen a lot of opponent campaigns. And the one I'm thinking specifically of is Rachel Notley in the 2015 election, where she just went dark. She went away. What do you think they're trying to do here by hiding Mark Carney, who is no stranger to the media, Sean? Like, this is a guy who loves
to
being
talk
in the media. He's been on every global panel in the last several decades. He's had his pictures in gossip magazines, being in the Royal Wimbledon boss. What do you think's going on here? What's the strategy?
Well, I think that there are a lot of liberals, if I had to guess, that are concerned about how ready he is for prime time, like you said, and have either spent some time with him or seen the very little bit of media that he has done, and it has raised some alarm bells. And so I think there is a thought that we can run him on his resume, not on his either platform or policy or ideas, or getting him out to the media. And I think there is a bit of this mentality of the Trudeau establishment coming and just picking who their next savior is going to be for the party, and just get them in place no matter what, and we'll deal with the campaign and messaging later. And one of the things that happened yesterday, instead of Carney being out there doing press conferences, he released a campaign video. And I mean, a campaign video is not an equivalent. It's not a substitution for answering hard questions from journalists or from Canadians, because it's a scripted, put to music, clipped little feel good kind of message that campaigns will put out there. But that's not something that tells Canadians who you are or what you're going to do. So I think what you're seeing is them playing the safe front runner style campaign, which is they know they're ahead in endorsements, they know they're ahead in money, they know that they have a candidate who is known to Liberals and maybe not as well known to Canadians. And there's this thought probably that if we can just get him across the finish line to the leadership, then he's in, and then we can try and do the same thing with Canadians and just do tightly scripted messaging and nice little photo ops and things like this, and we can maybe put him over the edge. And that's why it's important that Canadians are paying attention to the fact that he is in hiding, that he's not around. Because listen, people are busy, they have lives, and they're not paying attention to the ins and outs of every interview and every clip. So people may not have even really realized that he hasn't surfaced in a couple of weeks here. And it's important for Canadians that are looking at this to realize that this is a guy that is going to potentially be prime minister in a matter of a few weeks, and hasn't answered a tough question, a hard question from journalists really since this race has started. And the last thing I'll say on this too is doing media interviews and panels as a private citizen or as a business person is not the same thing as a candidate for prime minister. And so pointing to his previous media experience or previous experience is not the same thing. We are at a point of national crisis. We have conversations with other foreign leaders and conversations about US tariffs and all of this, and we have no idea if this guy is up to the task at all of the job that he is seeking. Yeah. And it's not like Canadians get to make the decision. It's the Liberal Party that gets to make the decision. And that's the point that people need to remember too. If we were in a general election, it would be up to Canadians to decide who the next prime minister is going to be. But the Liberal Party establishment is trying to ram their chosen candidate down the throats of Canadians
without being vetted, essentially.
And without a general election.
So, and that is what's going to happen. And there's just a couple of other takeaways that I think people who aren't familiar with campaign strategy need to take away from this hiding phenomenon that we're seeing out of Mark Carney. So I don't think that they have anything new. I don't think that they actually have any solutions for Canada's problems. And by they, I mean Mark Carney and his senior campaign team, which is Justin Trudeau's inner circle, right? And I think what they want to do is just they're just trying to change out the hood ornament here. They don't really want to change policy. And there's a proof point on this. So outside of him not coming out with any remarkably changed policy, you had Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault come out this week and endorse Mark Carney. And Stephen Guilbeault, for those of you who might not be familiar with him, he's the guy who, before he entered politics, climbed the CN Tower with Greenpeace. There's this iconic photo of him in an orange jumpsuit being arrested afterwards. I think he had really harassed the wife of former Alberta Premier Ralph Klein in our house as well too. I think that's right. And because he's a radical proponent of the carbon tax, like this, it's almost like religion for him. He's somebody who just a while ago said that he would resign if the carbon tax was abolished. And so he endorsed Mark Carney this week. The campaign let him go out and do media. And he was asked point blank, this is Stephen Guilbeault, if he was going to support the abolition of the carbon tax and if the carbon tax was dead. And his answer was very blunt. It was no. So I think through some of these proxies, the campaign is signaling that there will be no change with Mark Carney, that Mark Carney is Justin Trudeau. These are interchangeable hood ornaments. But there's another layer underneath that. These people have not run a competitive campaign in over a decade. And what it feels like to me is that you've got butts, may or may not be Katie Telford, some other people who have announced that they're working on the campaign, Bruce Anderson, etc. They are running a playbook from 2015. They don't have a new way of thinking, and it's certainly not a new way of thinking that is rooted in the reality of a 2025 electorate that is, weary of paying high prices for groceries, can't find houses, living in the context of a broken immigration system, just angry at the establishment, and they're running the ultimate establishment candidate. And I think Carney is doing this too, because I think he was looking at his corporate career and kind of going, it's coming to the end of the road. And this hasn't been talked about, but you have that net zero alliance that he was so famous for launching as his in his role as UN climate czar. That's all fallen apart. Canadian banks, everybody's pulling out of this alliance. He was on the chair of Bloomberg News. The mainstream media is being disrupted right now. He, is on the board of Stripe. Even the payments industry is being disrupted right now. And Mark Carney's not a founder. He's not somebody who's built businesses. He comes in and this kind of this connector, this cocktail reception guy that I guess pulls deals together or what way. But he's old news. He is 2015. When we are living in 2025. So I took from all this, the hiding strategy is this team's out of gas. They don't have ideas to meet the electorate now. And if they did, Justin Trudeau would have trotted them out already. Trust me.
Yeah.
And I think they're ideologically tied to this old way of thinking. And I think Mark Carney was rapidly approaching being old news in business. And now they just have this disaster that they expect Canadians to be appreciative of. And that's where I think the that first clip you played, I started at the top. And even his campaign slogan that they chose, Sean, the campaign slogan of I'm in, it's like an applause line for the public, right? I'm in. Well, I don't care. What are you going to do for me? And it was like I can just see, his campaign, Mark Carney's campaign strategist team sitting around and going like, the tagline is I'm in. Everybody's going to applaud for you. Thank you for doing this. Meanwhile, what the voters of 2025 Canada are saying is, what's in it for me by electing an elitist who can't even, find the time to talk to the Canadian Parliamentary Press Gallery, who are arguably, left-leaning to begin with. So I think it was a disaster week for them. I really do. I think that they might not see it that way, but I really think that when you look at the sentiment you and I see, particularly in our community in Calgary, Nose Hill, across the country, they are completely misreading the room.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more on it. I think it's a demonstration of how out of touch this government and these members of parliament actually are with where the Canadian population is at. And you have to remember, like 5 out of these 7, I think we forgot to mention Karina Gould when we were running through the 7, but 5 out of the 7 of these, if you are including Mark Carney as the insider economic architect to this, have been at the forefront of pushing these policies, pushing all of the disastrous legislation that has gone on in this country for the last number of years. And here they are positioning themselves based on politics, not on policy.
100%.
And again, it comes back to this. I think they actually genuinely think that Justin Trudeau was the only problem. Now, don't get me wrong, Justin Trudeau was a large part of the problem, but the reality is that they went along and helped push and help come up and create, especially Mark Carney and Christia Freeland, these policies that have been so destructive to Canadians, so destructive to businesses. And so they are pushing the same old ideas. And I think there is this out of touch thought that, well, if we just simply change the personality at the top of the ticket, then that will solve all of our problems. And who better than this world traveled, well, whatever spoken Mark Carney, who has no idea what's actually going on in Canada, but certainly has an idea of what's going on around the world.
So let's talk about his challenger, his primary challenger, Christia Freeland. So she was out this week as too. Now I have to grudgingly give her credit and then drive a knife into this, but Christia Freeland was out this week making a policy announcement. It was just the craziest policy announcement I've ever heard. So Christia Freeland comes out this week with, her week one, what would be a signature policy announcement that you, in a campaign, anything that you're announcing in week one, you want to keep the narrative on through a 6-week, essentially election period. So Christia Freeland comes out this week, Sean, and announces what?
The thing that she would do if prime minister is repeal this capital gains tax. The
problem is who introduced the capital gains tax well under a year ago.
Yeah, a minister by the name of Christia
Freeland. So
go figure.
Just ridiculous. I think that any political observer in Canada who watched this, so you had Christia Freeland come out. It would have been March, April of last year, so under a year ago, come out and just vehemently, almost with like zealotous religious fervor, talk about how we needed a capital gains tax, which, by the way, makes us even more non-competitive with other jurisdictions where we see people moving to, like the United States. And she says, oh, well, we need this for generational equity, and just insert all levels of bullshit here. And then she comes out and it's like, wow, we don't need this capital gains tax. And it's like, girl, you're just a liar all around. Like, it just destroyed any credibility that she had. Terrible announcement. Everybody across this political spectrum was mocking her for this. But I mean, props. If there was a Liberal Gold Star of the Week, at least she tried. Participation Award for Christia Freeland for announcing some sort of policy. But she, you had an observation about her this week on just some of her comms that I think was really intuitive for people. This hasn't been discussed much. And why don't you talk about that? I think we might have a clip too, right?
Yeah, we've got a clip that will go into it, and I am of two minds in talking about this, because it's not the same around the world in all places, but in Canada we tend to leave some of these more private matters for politicians sort of private. But she had a reaction to a media scrum that was a little bit jarring to watch, and the thing that's interesting about it is it's not the first time that it's happened with her, that there's been a bit of a odd reaction to some of what has been going on around her. I'll play the clip and we can talk a little bit about it here.
Okay, here it goes.
Okay, c'est difficile d'entendre parce que tout le monde crie. Ok, alors. Sur le gain capital, pourquoi vous faites marche arrière?
Yeah, that was weird.
Yeah, and so I mean, if for those that are listening that can't see
go
the
ahead.
video, just to set the scene. So you've got Christia Freeland. She's going into the Liberal caucus meeting, and she's surrounded by the parliamentary press gallery reporters who are all shouting different questions at her. And I mean, Michelle, you've been in these sort of scrums, so you can maybe give people a bit of an impression of what it's like to be in this. But you can see her recoil a little bit. She is looking like she's a bit overwhelmed or something. There's a physical reaction that she's having, and she's saying in French there, it's hard to hear while you're all yelling questions, and she kind of recomposes herself and starts to ask the question. And bring this up because, again, this is an individual that is running, could be potentially prime minister in a matter of a few weeks. We have a lot of crises, and this is not the first time that we've seen this unusual behavior from her, and it just raises questions about what is going on for somebody that is trying to seek the position of prime minister. And so it was unusual. Like I said, it was a bit jarring to watch, and it's one of these things that just raises questions about Christia Freeland.
What's going on?
What is going on there? And it's an uncomfortable conversation. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just gonna get in on this. So when I saw this clip, I actually thought it was an old clip of her, like prior to her launching her leadership race. So I was surprised it was today or yesterday or whenever it happened. It was after she had launched her leadership race. And you're right, she's had numerous press conferences over the last several months where she's looked, like you said, she recoils from questions. And, I think I would just leave it at this. You're right. I've been in very difficult media scrums before. I've been a member of parliament for a hot minute, and I've served in virtually every seat in the House of Commons. I've served as a cabinet minister. I've served both sides of the aisle, in opposition and in government. And there have been times when you have difficult scrums. I think that the recoiling from the questions, I thought it was weird that her campaign team hadn't coached her, at least about her. It just looks like she's uncomfortable in the role, and she doesn't follow through. This is a hallmark of Christia Freeland. It's her word salad, right? She doesn't follow through with a cogent, firm, cohesive answer, one way or the other. I mean, her answer can be something that you or I as conservatives don't necessarily agree with, but she never lands anywhere. And I'll just say one more thing. I think that this is a big problem for her. So she's not a cabinet minister anymore. She was fired by Justin Trudeau. She admitted that on TV, which, I mean, that's a whole other conversation. What a bonehead move to say I was fired on national, like when you're in the leadership campaign. Terrible. But she was fired by Justin Trudeau. So she's a backbencher right now.
Yeah.
And that means that she's not held to the same level of communications discipline as a cabinet minister would be. And she's running for prime minister right now. So this is the time for her to say, here is what my agenda would be. And she has, to her credit, she has been out talking to media, but she keeps giving these word salad, recoiling answers to the press gallery, which she only has 6 weeks now before the leadership vote. And I don't know if there'll be some sort of advanced voting mechanism. We don't know with the leadership or the Liberal Party's rules. She only has 6 weeks to get her narrative out, and we get word salad. So to me, Sean, what that means and what I think Canadians should take from this is that is her. That is Christia Freeland, freed from the shackles of PMO talking points and PMO oversight in the middle of a leadership campaign. She cannot land on an answer. And that is just, I think that's equally as damning as Mark Carney hiding from the media, because to me, it's their equivalencies. Neither of these people have a plan to address Canadian concerns. And why? Because it's their own record. It is their own record. Both her, Christia Freeland, and Mark Carney are the architects of the Liberal economic policy. Carney is a senior economic advisor. She's been the finance minister. And I think that she has, both of them, Carney's taken the tact of hiding. She is out there, but she can't come up with future policy because she can't defend her record. So
Totally.
I think that, this is kind of a good segue into like a conversation about running away from their record that I know you want to briefly touch on, and then I think we should go into the whole
Yeah, well, I want to echo what you've said a couple of times here, and just reiterate that as they are talking about their plans or lack of plan, however you want to look at it, these Liberal candidates are tripping over themselves at a rapid pace to see who can run away from their record faster. And you said it earlier, and I'm going to say it again. These people are liars. They are lying to Canadians. They have spent the last decade plus putting in place these policies, defending them to the death, running an early election back in 2021 on these policies as well, putting this in place now. And now, as we approach the next election, and polling and Canadians seem to show that they are done with this Liberal government and done with these policies, they are tripping over themselves, trying to position themselves as the ones that will undo this record. And I don't think Canadians will be fooled by this, because the reality is, if Canadians want a government that is going to undo things like the carbon tax and the capital gains, they're going to elect Conservatives to do it. They're going to elect the party that has been saying this was the bad plan from day one, and not elect Liberals who will say anything and do anything to hold on to power. And that is what we're witnessing right now, is Liberal leadership candidates that have, for their entire lives and entire elected time in office, been running one way, and now when they are looking at the polls and looking at the positions of people saying, "Oh no, don't listen to that version of myself. I will be the one that will undo the carbon tax, or I'll be the one that will get rid of the capital gains tax." Yeah. It is garbage, and these guys are lying. It's their policy.
And it's not even like 6 degrees of separation. It's actually Christia Freeland and Mark Carney's policies. So I think that's going to be a recurring theme of the next 6 weeks. It's that they are going to have to run away. Well, they are running away from their record. So,
and it makes you wonder what's next. Like, what are they going to run away from next?
Well, stay tuned to this podcast. Click like and subscribe so that we can unpack it for you. I do want to move into something that neither Freeland or Carney have called for, which is the recall of Parliament, which went into the media a bit more this week, because Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre, he called for Parliament to be recalled in the context of the threat of nuclear grade economy destroying American tariffs. So I'm going to break down what happened this week very briefly. So there's been a lot of discussions about the Americans imposing 25% blanket tariffs on Canadian goods this week. And Pierre Poilievre issued a release early in the week saying, look, one of the key irritants that the Americans brought up with regard to essentially the American justification for tariffs is the lack of border security measures on the Canada-US border. And in the past, Mr. Poilievre has talked about how this shouldn't have addressing border security measures shouldn't have taken the Trump administration threatening tariffs for the Liberals to address, but I digress. So that has been the key irritant that the Americans have listed in terms of why they're thinking about tariffs, right? So what Mr. Poilievre said in his press release this week was that Parliament needs to be recalled because the Liberals committed to, I think it was $1.3 billion worth of border security measures in the fall economic statement, ostensibly to meet the American tariff irritant demands. But yet those measures can't be passed including legislative measures to implement them unless Parliament is sitting. So it's difficult for Trudeau, our lame duck prime minister, or any leadership candidate to say that to the Americans that we're serious about addressing these measures without having passed them in Parliament. So ergo, Parliament needs to resume. And I thought it was very telling that neither Freeland nor Carney, who have both raised this issue in their launches, the tariff issue, neither of them called for Parliament to be recalled to deal with this issue. I know you have some things you want to weigh in on.
I mean, are we shocked? Are we surprised that these individuals do not want to have Parliament recalled? I mean, I can think of a few reasons why they don't want Parliament recalled. It puts them in a position of having to be accountable to the opposition, accountable to the Canadian public. It puts them back in the spotlight of the media and the press, as we've talked about in here. But this is the one that just blows my mind the worst. This is a no-brainer. I mean, I don't think it matters how you vote in this country. I think you are looking at what is happening. You are looking at the threats coming from south of the border, and you are thinking, we need a functioning government. We need a functioning Parliament in place that is discussing, debating, and putting forward solutions to this. This is not a complicated thought process, I think, for most people outside of the Liberal leadership race with Mark Carney and Christia Freeland. They are the only ones that seem to be dancing around this idea of recalling Parliament. It blows my mind that this is not a part of the conversation.
I have to jump in here. So let's talk about, quote, in scare quotes, Team Canada. This is what Trudeau and all of these guys keep jumping out and saying, we need a Team Canada. We need a Team Canada approach to tariffs. Well, how can you have Team Canada without Parliament? Right? I mean, so this week, and for those of you who are following this on Substack, and of course, if you're not, please click like and subscribe. Sean and I come to you with updates all the time from Parliament. But if you follow me on Substack, I put out a piece this week that talked about how you cannot have Team Canada without Parliament. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Like, you can read the article. But Trudeau has tried to substitute Parliament with this group. I think it's called the Prime Minister's Council on Canada-US Relations. And it's a group of people who essentially they're representing corporate interests, or they have ties into liberal circles, or both. And none of these people are elected, so they don't have the authority, through a functional Parliament to pass border measures, let's say. And also, they don't represent Canadians in the way that I do. I represent, close to 120,000 Canadians. And if you really want a Team Canada approach, you need to hear from the voices of elected representatives. Absolutely. Through debate. I think about right now that if Parliament was, if we weren't prorogued and we were allowed to, let's say, convene parliamentary committees, every parliamentary committee could be meeting right now to question senior public servants, invite leaders from the business and civil society communities to ask some of these tough questions about the tariff situation, and demand answers from the government at a time when they're not giving them. That is the function that is the function of Parliament. So I think every Canadian needs to understand that at a time, this is classic Trudeau, say one thing and do the exact opposite. He's calling for national unity. He's calling for a Team Canada approach. And yet he is undermining the democratic institutions that are supposed to foster national unity, for example, Parliament. He is tacitly encouraging provincial infighting for political gain, and he has no plan. If he was serious about this, Parliament would be convened to address the border security measures at a minimum, right? So I think it's very important for people to understand that. I go into it in a lot more detail in that piece, but so Parliament isn't sitting. We've got this lame duck prime minister, no Parliament situation. But he did say something this week about tariffs. He did say
Yes, he
something,
did.
Sean Schnell. And I know you have a rant about this, something. You caught it first.
Yeah, so as people well know, Justin Trudeau, unfortunately, is still the prime minister, and as you have rightly pointed out, has put us in this position. And I'll say, before we get into exactly what he say, shame on Justin Trudeau and Jagmeet Singh, because they are fully responsible for the position we currently find ourselves in. It's Justin Trudeau's ego and his own political just fortunes that he put ahead of the country. He could have resigned well into the fall. This isn't a surprise, the threat of these American tariffs. This was talked about all through the U.S. election and after Trump was elected as president. This hasn't come out of left field. He could have resigned last year. Jagmeet Singh could have brought the government down in the fall. We could have been into a general election. We could have had a new government elected with a mandate, and Parliament could be sitting. But aside from that, so yes, Trudeau was at a Liberal cabinet meeting earlier this week and was giving some suggestions as to what Canadians could do in order to fight back against these tariffs.
Oh,
and
no.
I will play
Oh,
the clip
no.
here so everybody can see it.
The example from last time was Heinz's ketchup being replaced by French's ketchup because French's was still using Canadian tomatoes in its ketchup.
Oh, no.
So,
Ketchup.
this is the current prime minister's grand plan here to fight back against tariffs, is people choosing a different type of ketchup for their own personal grocery shopping. But the worst part about this is immediately following this, Kraft Heinz
I shouldn't laugh. This is not funny.
A statement.
This is really serious.
This statement: Heinz slams Trudeau for floating its made in Canada ketchup as a U.S. trade target. Kraft Heinz says it's deeply disappointed with Trudeau's misleading statements about the ketchup, which is made in Quebec using Ontario-grown tomatoes. And you're right. You just have to shake your head because it's so absurd. And this just is a perfect example, again, of just how out of his depth Trudeau is in dealing with this national crisis, and how little he actually is paying attention to what is going on. And Canadians should be terrified about this. And this is the sort of thing for why we should have Parliament sitting to be able to be holding this government accountable for ridiculous statements like 100%. This.
And so in my article that I mentioned earlier, some of the questions, and I'm just reading them here, some of the questions that need to be posed in a parliamentary forum are things like, did the Liberals propose a border security plan to the Americans? How are they going to implement it with Parliament being closed? Are there other irritants or posture changes on the part of the Americans that have precipitated the possibility of retaliatory tariffs? Or what was the Liberals' response vis-a-vis the border not deemed sufficient? What criteria are they using to select retaliatory tariffs? How have they determined if these measures will actually pressure the Americans? These are all, I have more questions in that article, but the point being, Sean, to the whole catch-up thing is that the question I have as a parliamentarian but can't ask because Parliament is shuttered is, have you proposed these border measures to the Americans?
Exactly.
How are you proposing them to the Americans if they haven't been passed through Parliament? Are you willing to recall Parliament to get that done?
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, if retaliatory measures are needed, and they may well be, I mean, Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre talked about that this week. This is an issue that needs to be discussed within a parliamentary committee if you are actually going to have a, quote, Team Canada approach. And I see, Sean, I won't get into it too much, but when I see people, particularly those that are on this, quote, PM Council on U.S.-Canada Relations, denigrating parts of the Canadian economy or whatnot, or the Prime Minister himself, and not calling for Parliament to be recalled, it's really telling of the fact that I think that there's a lot of politics that are at play here on the part of the Prime Minister and the Liberal Party. They are trying to create a catastrophic nuclear grade channel changer because their party's a dumpster fire. And they're doing it on the backs of this issue that it will affect every Canadian one way or the other.
Entirely.
And it's just, and so they have more than lost the moral authority to govern. We should be in we should have gone to a general election a long time ago. Here we are. At the very least, Parliament should be recalled to deal with this issue, which I actually think Poilievre deserves a lot of credit for putting out a strong statement that was very focused in that regard. But I guess
and people should go read that Substack, because like the list of questions that you're putting out there, these are serious questions to a serious situation, and the response that you're getting from Trudeau with this ketchup, like we kind of laugh about it because it's so deeply unserious, and it shows,
he didn't even research it.
Right. This is the point,
and the Americans are watching this, right? Okay, all right, we're ranting now. We're ranting. Let's go through, and we're ranting.
It makes you just shake your head. So
we've got about 10 minutes left, and I want to go through the underreported stories of the week, and I want to close with what I think is the biggest one.
Okay,
it's on immigration, but let's go through yours quickly first.
Yeah, so I think there is a lot of oxygen that's being sucked up by the Liberal leadership and obviously the conversation around tariffs, which absolutely people should be paying attention to. But there are these other things that are going on. One of them that certainly caught my attention this week was another municipality in Canada, this time being Kingston, has become the latest municipality to declare a food insecurity emergency in their city. And this is as a result of more Canadian families, more Canadian individuals struggling to be able to afford food and basic necessities. And so the municipality has declared this emergency and asking for other levels of government to get involved to try and rectify this situation. And that also came on the heels of another RBC report that said that 48% of Canadians, 48% of the people they asked can no longer maintain their standard of living. And while 48% also said they don't ever believe they're going to be able to get financially ahead. And so although there has been a lot of conversation in the media and a lot of attention driven towards what is happening with these other topics that we have talked about, the reality for many Canadians is that housing unaffordability, food insecurity, cost of living is their day-to-day struggle. It is a challenge for people to be making ends meet, to be paying bills, getting by. And we are seeing every single week evidence of just the disastrous policies of this Liberal government on display in people's real lives.
Kingston, why does that ring a bell? Oh, wait.
Yeah.
It's represented by Liberal muckraker in chief, Mark Gerritsen.
Right? Yes.
So Mark, of course, Mark is Mark. But, when you have a headline like that in your community, it behooves you to respond with a great degree of gravity and seriousness. And, he was essentially still out there shit posting all week. He didn't talk about this once. And so I guess I bring this up because when we talk about the core economic issues that Canadians are struggling with, food insecurity, food cost, housing, crime was such a big issue this week. We don't have time to get into it, but another week of just crazy crime stories. Yeah. You've got Liberals. It's not just the cabinet. It's the rank and file caucus members who have never talked about these issues and instead have just shitposted, essentially. And, I just think it's really telling that the rot is so pervasive that this week, the MP for the area, when such a devastating story like that came out, couldn't be moved to at least say, if it was me, and I've done this before, we've gone through leadership races, say, hey, I am not going to support anybody until I see a policy on this, right? Yeah. Nothing like that. Brutal. So we've talked about food, the RBC report. Not great news on housing either, right?
No, there were some stories out this week that were talking about how there are housing nonprofits in this country that are having to provide resources to families that have annual incomes over $100,000, and that they're struggling even to be able to do anything for low income or middle class Canadian families. And this is, again, just another example of disastrous housing policy from this Liberal government on display. And I think your point about the Liberal backbench is really important, and I would wager that they are not coming out to talk about this because it's an admission of failure on their part, an admission that all the money they have spent, all the policies they have put in place, has not turned the tide of inflation, cost of living, housing, crime, opioid, like you name it, crisis after crisis we are continuing to see. And Canadians don't even need to look in the media. They are living this. Their friends, family, and neighbors are living this. They know this. But these are stories that I think it's really important that we continue to talk about and point out to people so that it doesn't get lost in the shuffle and in the political drama that's unfolding in the Liberal Party. There is real challenges that people are facing still.
I want to talk about an underreported story now. And can I just get you to throw this tweet up on the screen for people who are watching on video, and I'll read it for those who are listening in podcast format. So today or yesterday, the Canadian Border Services Agency, so the CBSA, their official Twitter feed, put out this tweet, which said, "Entry to Canada anywhere but at an official point of entry is dangerous and illegal. You will be arrested." So for those of you who are listening, so Sean, you and I have worked together for a long time. And you remember when I was immigration critic back in 2016, I was, I think, immigration critic for 5 years. And back in 2017, Justin Trudeau, after the Trump administration came in the US, put out this tweet and it was, I think, in response to stories that Americans were fleeing persecution in America, the United States of America. And he put out this tweet that said, essentially to the effect of, if you are fleeing persecution, come to Canada, #welcome to Canada. And Canada saw this uptick, huge uptick, tens of thousands of people. I think today, when you look at that into the entirety, it's hundreds of thousands of people crossed at border crossings, not official points of entry, illegal points of entry, like unofficial points of entry, from the United States into Canada and claimed asylum. And the Liberals facilitated this. They set up formal structures at these illegal crossings like Roxham Road. They facilitated, the RCMP were essentially helping people illegally cross the border. They were helping them with their luggage. They used taxpayer dollars. They're still using taxpayer dollars to put people who entered Canada this way up in hotels. They expedited work permits. And I remember at the time, and you remember this, anybody who said, wait, this is illegal. You can't enter the country this way. It's illegal. It's illegal. Anybody who said that said, it was essentially, the implication was that you were racist, number one, or a far right activist. I've got the receipts on that. And so, and that you had to use the term irregular. So actually most journalistic standards of practice or nomenclature that was used within newsrooms demanded that you called people who entered the country illegally irregular. Irregular. I can't tell you how many press conferences I did. Well, you know.
Yes.
Where just vilified for saying this. And now today you've got the CBSA saying, don't do this. It's illegal. And I saw this, and again, when we talk about the Liberals not acknowledging failures and lying, essentially, right? This is another example of this, because they normalized for years. And these aren't, it's not just like, it's not bureaucrats at the CBSA. You had now Justice Minister, I remember, Arif Farani. He was the parliamentary secretary to immigration at the time. Several immigration ministers, Ahmed Hussein. There were so many of them. I can't keep track. They all said, no, it's irregular. And, we can't call it anything other than that. And these blah, 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 blah. They broke the immigration system by normalizing this behavior. And the fact that they're not admitting that they created a pull for people to illegally enter the country and then claim asylum and essentially abuse our asylum system. Because, like, frankly, if you've reached upstate New York, your life is not in dire straits.
Right.
They normalize the fact that if you come to Canada this way, you're going to be able to stay for years and years and years. And I just, it was a lot to see that tweet today. I look, it is illegal. We need to echo that message. But the fact that the Liberals have never taken accountability or never apologized or never said, we did this. And not only did they do it, but they vilified anybody who spoke up against it.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I'll probably have to write about this. It was really hard to see that today.
I think you should. And I mean, the takeaway for me is this. The Liberal Party, this Liberal government, they are full of liars and gaslighters that will say and do anything
gaslighters,
to stay in power.
Exactly.
And so this is another perfect example. I think you absolutely should write and remind people about this, because like you said, this has been going on for a long time, and I don't expect that a lot of people have been paying attention and following this at all. But that, if I could sum it up in one sentence, it would be that this Liberal Party, liars and gaslighters, and they deserve to be thrown out in the next election, which should be happening right now.
And again, like I want to reiterate, Conservatives, we have always supported an immigration system that strengthens Canada, that's paired with integration, right? And on the asylum system, I spent years, even while we were in opposition, talking about how Canada could help people that had experienced legitimate genocide, like the Yazidi people. Remember how hard it was to get the Yazidi genocide recognized in Parliament? And it's just, not only are they liars, but I think the term gaslighter is something that Canadians need to take away from this Liberal government. And the fact that, Carney, Freeland, they're all part of this. They will gaslight and lie to you. Mm-hmm. And it's on every single policy issue. I really do think that this government will be remembered for that. Canadians all have the lived experience of that now. But I would be a bad Conservative member of Parliament if I didn't say that there is hope that the Conservative Party is going to axe the tax, fix the budget, stop the crime, and build the homes. I just shuffled up the order just for spice. But no, in all seriousness, those are the things people are asking us for. And that's what our plans are based on. So if you're listening to this for the first time, click subscribe. If you're listening to this on a platform other than Substack, subscribe to our Substack newsletter. We try to give you a sense of what's happening behind the scenes in Canadian politics. Firsthand view of that with the experience of people who have a lot of background in seeing how politics works. And I'll just close by saying I'm long on Canada. Canada is a great country filled with great people. And as Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre says, Canada first.